He died on August 16th, 1977. The world felt it, in a tremor in the fabric of culture. And Elvis Presley was gone at 42. The official story was a heart attack. A simple, tragic end for a complicated man. But the story never felt complete. It was too neat. Too quiet for a life lived so loud. Whispers started almost immediately. It was the drugs. It was the pressure. It was something else entirely. Something hidden. And then people started to notice the patterns. The echoes. His death wasn't an endpoint. It was a connection. A strange, invisible thread linking his story to other famous tragic endings. And was it just coincidence? The random chaos of a universe that doesn't care about kings or icons. Or was something else at play? A kind of blueprint for tragedy, a price for a certain kind of fame. You know, these aren't just stories about how famous people died. They are questions about the strange synchronicities that tie them all together, with Elvis standing right at the center of the web. Number 16, did the King of Pop follow the King's blueprint to the grave? Michael Jackson died on June 25th, 2009. The news broke and the internet buckled. It felt impossible. He was preparing for a massive comeback tour. He was 50 years old. Like Elvis, he was a king in his own right, the King of Pop. The parallel was immediate and unavoidable. Two of the most famous entertainers in human history, both dying unexpectedly in their own homes, both deaths unleashing a global wave of grief that hadn't been seen since, well, the last one. But the connections go deeper than just the reaction. They feel like a script being read twice. Elvis's home was Graceland, a southern mansion turned into a fortress against the outside world. Michael's was Neverland Ranch, a fantasy world built to keep reality at bay. Both men created private kingdoms where they could control their environment, surrounded by a small, trusted circle. But these sanctuaries became their prisons. In the final years, both men were deeply isolated, trapped by their own fame. The walls designed to keep the world out also kept them in. Author Ray Connolly wrote about this parallel in his book, Being Elvis, A Lonely Life. He described how both men, after reaching a level of fame no one had seen before, simply couldn't function in the normal world. They couldn't go to a grocery store, they couldn't walk down the street, so they retreated. Then there's the medicine. Elvis's death was officially cardiac arrest, but the toxicology report, which was fought over for years, revealed a cocktail of prescription drugs. Demerol, Quaaludes, Valium, and more. All prescribed by his personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, or Dr. Nick. Michael Jackson's death was officially acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication. A fatal dose of a powerful surgical anesthetic administered by his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray. The parallels are chilling. Both men had put their entire trust in a single doctor who catered to their needs, providing them with drugs to help them sleep, to wake them up, to manage the pain of a life lived under impossible pressure. Dr. Nick was later acquitted of criminal charges, but had his medical license permanently revoked. Dr. Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. 2 doctors, 2 dead kings, 2 careers ruined. It's a pattern of dependency and enablement, and there is Lisa Marie Presley. The most direct human link between these 2 tragedies. She was Elvis's only child. She was Michael Jackson's wife from 1994 to 1996. She lived in the shadow of one king and then married another. She saw the patterns up close. In a blog post written just after Michael's death, she described a conversation she had with him. He was staring at her with an intense gaze and said, "I'm afraid that I'm going to end up like him the way he did." She knew he meant her father. She tried to dismiss it, but he was serious. He knew. He saw the trajectory. He felt the pull of the same forces that took her father. He was living in the same gilded cage, surrounded by the same kind of people, fighting the same demons. His marriage to Lisa Marie was seen by many as a publicity stunt, a bizarre union of 2 dynasties. But perhaps it was something more, a cry for help, a desperate attempt to connect with the only person on earth who might understand the crushing weight of that specific legacy. She had seen the end of the story before, the comeback tours of the final tragic echo. Elvis was overweight, sick, and exhausted, but he was still touring. His final concert was in Indianapolis on June 26, 1977, less than 2 months before he died. He was pushing his body past its limit to meet the demands of his career. Michael Jackson was preparing for This Is It, a grueling series of 50 shows in London. Rehearsal footage shows a man who was shockingly thin and frail, yet still able to perform. He was pushing himself toward a comeback that his body couldn't handle, allegedly using propofol to get the sleep he so desperately needed to keep going. Both men died on the eve of trying to prove they still had it. Was Michael Jackson's death a tragic but unique event? Or was he consciously or unconsciously following a path laid out 32 years earlier? Did he see Elvis's end not as a warning, but as an inevitability for someone of his stature? And what does it say about Lisa Marie Presley to be so intimately connected to two of the most significant and eerily similar deaths in modern history? Number 15, was his daughter's death the final echo from Graceland's halls? Lisa Marie Presley died on January 12, 2023. She was 54. She collapsed in her home in Calabasas, California. The cause was a small bowel obstruction, a rare but known complication from a bariatric surgery she had years earlier. But the news felt like something more than a medical anomaly. It felt like a story coming to its inevitable, heartbreaking conclusion. The only child of the king, who spent her life navigating the turbulent waters of his legacy, was gone. And her death was inextricably linked to the man she called father. Just 2 days before she died, Lisa Marie was at the Golden Globe Awards. She was there to support Austin Butler, the actor who portrayed her father in the biopic Elvis. She looked frail. During an interview on the red carpet, she had to lean on her friend Jerry Schilling, a longtime associate of her father. She spoke slowly, deliberately. She said the film was mind-blowing and that Butler had captured her father's essence perfectly. She was there to celebrate his life, but watching her, you could see the toll that life had taken. She was born into a world that wasn't real. She grew up at Graceland, a place that was part home, part museum, part shrine. She was 9 years old when she found her father's body on the bathroom floor. That image never leaves a person. Her life was a public spectacle from birth. Her marriages were headline news to musician Danny Keough, to Michael Jackson, to actor Nicolas Cage, to musician Michael Lockwood. Each one was dissected by the media. Her struggles with addiction were public knowledge. She spoke openly about her use of opioids, an addiction that began after the birth of her twin daughters. It's a haunting echo of her father's own battle with prescription drugs. The same class of drugs, the same search for an escape from pain, both physical and psychic. The book Elvis My Best Man by George Klein details Elvis's descent into dependency, a story that Lisa Marie seemed destined to partially relive. The weight of legacy is a heavy thing. For Lisa Marie, it was immense. She inherited Graceland and her father's estate. She was the keeper of the flame, but she was also an artist in her own right, a singer-songwriter with a powerful voice and a dark Gothic style. Her music was often about pain, loss, and survival. It was her attempt to carve out her own identity, separate from the long shadow of the king. Yet, she could never fully escape. The world always saw her as Elvis Presley's daughter. The most profound tragedy of her later life was the death of her son, Benjamin Keough, in 2020. He died by suicide at the age of 27. The resemblance between Benjamin and his grandfather was uncanny. Those people commented on it constantly. In an essay she wrote for National Grief Awareness Day, Lisa Marie called her grief relentless and eternal. She said it had destroyed her. She moved into a new home to be closer to her ex-husband and her twin daughters, the same home where she would later die. The grief was a physical presence in her life. It's impossible not to connect this crushing loss to her own premature death. The stress that such a profound trauma puts on a human body is immense. Her final resting place is at Graceland. She is buried in the meditation garden next to her son Benjamin and across from her father. The Presley family plot is a tourist attraction, a place of pilgrimage for millions, a place of private grief made eternally public. Her death closed a circle that began on August 16, 1977. She was the direct living link to Elvis. With her gone, a chapter of American mythology is over. Was her death simply a tragic medical event? Or was it the final physical manifestation of a lifetime of grief and pressure? Did the legacy of Elvis Presley, a force that brought joy to millions, ultimately become an unbearable burden for the person closest to him? And in the end, did Graceland, the home he loved, become a tomb for his entire family line? Number 14. Did the same Hollywood machine create and destroy its king and queen? Marilyn Monroe died on August 4th, 1962. She was 36. She was found in her Brentwood home, naked on her bed, a phone in her hand. The official cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning, ruled a probable suicide. Like Elvis, she was one of the most recognizable people on the planet, a symbol of an era. The ultimate blonde bombshell, the queen of Hollywood. Her death, like his, was a seismic shock. And like the official story has never been enough. The questions and conspiracies began immediately and have never stopped. The parallels between Elvis and Marilyn are stark. Both were born into poverty and obscurity. Normal Jean Mortensen and Elvis Aaron Presley. They were raw talents, diamonds in the rough, discovered and then molded by a system. For Marilyn, it was the Hollywood studio system. For Elvis, it was Colonel Tom Parker and RCA Records. They were transformed into larger-than-life personas. They became property. Their images, their names, their very beings were commodities to be bought and sold. They achieved a level of fame that was suffocating. Both battled with a profound sense of insecurity and a desperate need for validation. Marilyn took acting classes at the Actors Studio, trying to be seen as a serious actress, not just a sex symbol. Elvis famously lamented the quality of the films he was forced to make, cookie-cutter musicals that he knew were beneath his talent. He wanted to be James Dean. They were trapped in the golden cages they had helped build. Donald Spoto biography, Marilyn Monroe the biography, details her constant struggle with studio heads and directors to get better roles, to be taken seriously. Peter Guralnick's Careless Love, The Unmaking of Elvis Presley, paints a similar picture of an artist frustrated by his commercial obligations. And then there were the pills. Both Marilyn and Elvis became dependent on prescription drugs to manage their lives. Barbiturates to sleep, amphetamines to wake up. It was a chemical seesaw that allowed them to function under the intense pressure of their careers. Marilyn's struggles were well known within Hollywood. She was often late to set or unable to work at all. Elvis's dependency was a closely guarded secret, hidden behind the walls of Graceland and the loyalty of his Memphis Mafia. But the result was the same, a slow, corrosive process that destroyed their health and clouded their judgment. Their deaths were not sudden shocks to those who knew them best. They were the predictable outcomes of a long, slow decline. The mysteries surrounding their deaths are also mirror images. With Marilyn, the questions involve the Kennedys. Her alleged affairs with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, have fueled theories for decades. Was she silenced because she knew too much? Did the official timeline of her last day not add up? The 2022 Netflix documentary, The Mystery of Marilyn Monroe, The Unheard Tapes, re-examined these questions, presenting evidence that suggests the official story is, at best, incomplete. With Elvis, the mystery is less about political intrigue and more about a cover-up. Why was the initial cause of death given as a simple heart attack? Why was his toxicology report sealed? Why did his personal doctor, Dr. Nick, prescribe him over 10,000 doses of various drugs in the last year of his life alone? The Presley estate and the Memphis authorities seem determined to protect the image of Elvis, to sanitize the messy reality of his death. In both cases, the powerful machinery that had built them up in life seemed to work just as hard to control their narrative in death. Did Elvis and Marilyn ever meet? The rumors have persisted for years. One story claims they had a brief secret affair. Another says they were set up on a single, awkward date by a studio. There is no concrete evidence for either. But in a way, it doesn't matter. They were spiritual siblings born of the same 20th century fame machine. They were two of the first to experience modern global celebrity, and they both paid the ultimate price for it. Were their deaths suicides, accidents, or something else? Does it matter what we call them, when the root cause was a system that demanded more than any human could give? And is it possible that the blueprint for the self-destruction of a global icon was perfected on Marilyn Monroe and then simply reused on Elvis Presley 15 years later? Number 13 was one king's private decline, the opposite of another's public murder. John Lennon was murdered on December 8th, 1980. He was shot 5 times in the back outside his home at the Dakota apartment building in New York City. He was 40 years old. His death was a brutal, senseless act of violence that stunned the world. It was the opposite of Elvis's death. Elvis died in private, a slow fade behind closed doors. Lennon died in public, a sudden, violent end on a city street. One was a tragedy of self-destruction. The other was a tragedy of assassination, but these two kings, the king of rock and roll and the rebellious prince of the British invasion, are connected by more than just their shared musical kingdom. The Beatles and Elvis were two sides of the same coin. In the 1960s, Elvis was the solo icon, the established king. The Beatles were the collective, the usurpers from across the sea. They famously met only once on August 27th, 1965, at Elvis's home in Bel Air, California. By all accounts, the meeting was awkward. According to Chris Hutchins, a journalist who was there, Elvis was on his couch, remote controlling the TV, barely speaking. Lennon, frustrated, reportedly said, "Why don't you talk to us? If you're tired, we'll go." The ice was finally broken when Elvis had guitars brought out and they all started jamming. For a moment, they were just musicians, but the distance was there. They represented two different paths. After that meeting, their lives diverged dramatically. Elvis retreated into Hollywood, making a string of forgettable movies. His creative spark seemed to dim. The Beatles, on the other hand, pushed the boundaries of popular music with albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and The White Album. They embraced counterculture, experimented with drugs and spirituality, and became political. Lennon, in particular, became an outspoken activist for peace. Then came the late 60s and 70s. Elvis had his '68 comeback special, a stunning return to form. He was raw, powerful, and vital again. He went back to touring, becoming a Las Vegas spectacle in his signature white jumpsuit. But it was the beginning of his final, tragic chapter. He became isolated, bloated, and dependent on prescription drugs. He was a king in a rhinestone cage. Lennon, after the Beatles broke up in 1970, had a tumultuous solo career filled with brilliant music and political controversy. Then, in 1975, after the birth of his son Sean, he did something unthinkable for a rock star of his stature. He retired. For 5 years, he was a house husband and a father. He baked bread. He raised his son. He stepped away from the machine that had consumed so many, including Elvis. In 1980, he returned to music with the album Double Fantasy, a collaboration with his wife, Yoko Ono. It was an album about family, love, and starting over. He seemed happy, healthy, and creatively re-energized. He had found a way out of the trap, and that's when he was killed. Just as he had found a new way to live, his life was taken. His death was a violent intrusion of the outside world. Elvis's death was the result of the walls he built around himself. It's a cruel irony. The one who retreated into a private kingdom died from its excesses. The one who re-engaged with the world was killed by its madness. There's a strange political connection, too. Both men were watched by the U.S. government. Elvis, in a bizarre 1970 meeting, offered his services to President Richard Nixon as a federal agent at large to help fight the drug culture he saw as un-American, a culture Lennon was seen as a leader of. The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover had a massive file on John Lennon due to his anti-war activism, and the Nixon administration tried to have him deported. Elvis wanted to be an insider. Lennon was forced to be an outsider. Was Lennon's murder a random act of a deranged fan, or was it the tragic conclusion for a man who dared to challenge the establishment? Did Elvis's slow decline and Lennon's sudden end represent two different but equally fatal outcomes of unimaginable fame? And does the universe have a strange sense of balance, allowing one king to fade away in his castle while the other is struck down on the steps of his own home? Number 12. Did the People's Princess and the People's King die from the same insatiable camera flash? Her Princess Diana died on August 31st, 1997. Her death in a car crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris was a global event. The outpouring of grief was on a scale that few could remember. It was spontaneous, overwhelming, and deeply personal for millions who had never met her. The closest comparison anyone could make was to the death of Elvis Presley 20 years and 2 weeks earlier. The king of rock and roll and the queen of people's hearts. Two figures beloved by the masses who both died tragically and too young. The most obvious connection is the role of the media. Diana's car was being pursued by paparazzi on motorcycles. The insatiable hunger for a picture of her led directly to the high-speed chase that ended her life. She was quite literally hounded to death. Her brother Charles Spencer said it best in his eulogy, "I don't think she ever understood why her genuinely good intentions were sneered at by the media, why there appeared to be a permanent quest on their behalf to bring her down." She was the most hunted person of the modern age, Elvis experienced a different kind of media pressure. In his early years, he was condemned by the press and the establishment for his lewd and vulgar performances. He was a threat to the moral order. In his later years, the mainstream media largely ignored his physical decline, preferring to maintain the myth. But the tabloid press was relentless. Papers like the National Enquirer published unflattering photos of the overweight Elvis. Their most infamous act was publishing a photo of Elvis in his coffin, a shocking violation that sold millions of copies. Both Elvis and Diana were consumed by the public's right to know, a right that often morphed into a desire to own and destroy. They were also both outsiders who became insiders but never truly felt like they belonged. Diana was an aristocrat, but she was a commoner compared to the ancient lineage of the royal family. She was naive to the rigid protocols and emotional sterility of the firm, as she called it. She broke the rules. She was too emotional, too tactile, too human. She connected with people in a way the monarchy never could. Elvis was a poor boy from Tupelo, Mississippi. He was a truck driver who stumbled into a recording studio and changed the world. He was thrust into a world of wealth and power he was unprepared for. He always maintained his southern manners and his connection to his roots, but he was never truly comfortable in the high society circles his fame gave him access to. Both he and Diana were defined by a kind of authenticity that set them apart from the institutions they became a part of. This authenticity is what the public loved, and what the institutions often resented. Their relationships with their children are another poignant parallel. Diana was determined to give her sons, William and Harry, a semblance of a normal life. She took them to amusement parks, to homeless shelters, to visit AIDS patients. She wanted them to see the world outside of palace walls. Elvis doted on his daughter, Lisa Marie. He showered her with gifts, flying her to Idaho on a private jet just so she could play in the snow for 20 minutes. For both, their children were their anchor to reality, their most profound human connection in a life that was often unreal. The image of young William and Harry walking behind their mother's coffin is as seared into public memory as the image of a young Lisa Marie at her father's funeral. The nature of the grief they inspired was unique. It was personal. People felt they knew them. And Tina Brown, in her book, The Diana Chronicles, analyzes this phenomenon, explaining that Diana's public vulnerability made people feel a sense of kinship and protectiveness. Similarly, the fans who flocked to Graceland after Elvis's death weren't just mourning a singer. They were mourning a friend, a brother, a son. They felt a personal loss. Was Diana's death a tragic accident or the inevitable result of a celebrity culture that had spiraled out of control? Is there a direct line from the flashbulbs that stalked Elvis to the motorcycle headlights that chased Diana into that tunnel? And what is it about these figures, these flawed, beautiful, authentic people, that makes the public love them so much that the love itself becomes a fatal weapon? Number 11 was The Rebel, without a, because the ghost who haunted the king. James Dean died on September 30th, 1955. He was 24. He was killed when his Porsche 550 Spider, which he had nicknamed Little Bastard, collided with another car at an intersection near Colane, California. He had only starred in 3 major films. Only one, East of Eden, had been released before his death. Rebel, Without a Cause, and Giant were released posthumously. His death didn't end his career. It created his legend. He was frozen in time, the eternal symbol of youthful rebellion and angst. For a young truck driver in Memphis who was about to become the most famous man in the world, James Dean was everything. Elvis Presley idolized James Dean. He saw East of Eden multiple times. After Dean's death, he could recite entire scenes from Rebel Without a Cause from memory. He saw a kindred spirit in Dean's brooding, mumbling, intensely emotional screen presence. It was a new kind of masculinity. It was sensitive and dangerous at the same time. This was the kind of actor Elvis wanted to be. He didn't want to be a singer who acted in movies. He wanted to be a real actor, a serious actor, like James Dean. When Elvis got his first screen test for Paramount Pictures in 1956, the scene he chose to perform was from a play called The Rainmaker. But he didn't play it straight. He played it like Dean. He mumbled, he hesitated. He infused it with a raw, nervous energy. The studio executives were blown away. Hal Wallace, the producer who signed him, saw the connection immediately. This was the musical James Dean. The persona was set, Elvis the Rebel, It's what the public wanted, and it's what the studios sold. But there's a darker connection, a thread of tragedy that ties them together. Dean's death was sudden and violent. It cemented his myth. He would never get old, never sell out, never make a bad film. Elvis lived. He lived to become a Hollywood commodity, starring in a series of formulaic movies that he grew to hate. The dream of being the next James Dean died a slow death in films like Harum Scarum and Clambake. In a way, Dean's death created an impossible standard for Elvis to live up to. He was the rebel who got old. Then there is the curse. The legend of the little bastard, James Dean's Porsche, is a famous piece of Hollywood folklore. After the crash, the wreckage was sold. The stories say that the car was cursed, or a mechanic who was working on it had his legs crushed. A doctor who bought the engine was killed in a race. 2 tires from the car were sold and blew out simultaneously, causing another driver to crash. The car itself, while being transported, reportedly fell on and broke a teenager's hip. The stories are likely embellished, a mix of fact and fiction, but they contribute to the myth. A myth of a life so intense it left a cursed object in its wake. Elvis had his own cursed objects. His relationship with prescription drugs, his relationship with Colonel Tom Parker, his isolation at Graceland. These were the things that, like Dean's car, seemed to have a malevolent energy of their own, leading him down a path of destruction. The fast cars and rebellious attitude of the 1950s gave way to the quiet, slow decay of the 1970s. Natalie Wood, Dean's co-star in Rebel Without a Cause, is another tragic link. She was a friend of Elvis's. They dated briefly in 1956. Her own mysterious death by drowning in 1981 is another of Hollywood's great unsolved tragedies. Sal Mineo, another Ebell co-star, was stabbed to death in 1976. The film seems haunted by real-life tragedy. As Elvis, connected to both Dean by hero worship and Wood by friendship, stands adjacent to this web of doom. Did James Dean's death create a ghost that Elvis chased for the rest of his career? Was the failure to achieve Dean's level of acting credibility a source of the profound unhappiness that marked Elvis's later years? And is it possible that some figures burn so brightly that their death leaves behind a shadow, a curse that touches everyone who gets too close to their flame? Number 10, did the day the music died clear the path for the king's throne? The music died on February 3rd, 1959. That was the day a small plane carrying Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and JP, the Big Bopper Richardson, crashed in a cornfield near Clear Lake, Iowa. There were no survivors. Holly was 22, Valens was 17, the Big Bopper was 28. It was a staggering loss for the nascent world of rock and roll. These weren't just pop stars. They were pioneers. Buddy Holly in particular was a creative force. He wrote his own songs. He experimented with studio production. He was one of the first to use a solid body electric guitar. He was the future. Where was Elvis on the day the music died? He was in Germany. Private First Class Presley, U.S. Army serial number 53,310,761. He had been drafted in 1958, at the absolute peak of his fame. It was a huge risk. Would the public forget him? Would the music move on without him? When he was shipped off to Germany, a power vacuum was created at the top of rock and roll. A new generation of stars rushed to fill it. Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, Chuck Berry were all still there, but they were dogged by scandal and controversy. The clean-cut boy-next-door rockers were on the rise, and then there was Buddy Holly. And Holly was different. He wasn't a matinee idol like Elvis. He was a skinny, bespectacled kid from Texas. He was relatable, and his music was sophisticated. He was a bridge between the raw energy of early rock and the more melodic crafted pop of the 1960s. The Beatles famously chose their name as a play on Holly's band, the Crickets. And John Lennon and Paul McCartney were deeply influenced by his songwriting. He was a signpost pointing toward the future. The plane crash changed everything. In a single, tragic moment, 3 of rock's most promising voices were silenced. When Elvis returned from the army in 1960, the landscape was different. The raw, dangerous energy of the 50s was gone. Rock and roll was being tamed. Elvis himself was part of this change. His first post-army single was the schmaltzy ballad Stuck on You. He traded his gold lame for a tuxedo. He went to Hollywood. The rebellion was over. The connection isn't one of conspiracy, but of consequence. The deaths of Holly, Valens, and Richardson were a random tragedy. But that random tragedy had a profound and direct impact on the trajectory of Elvis's career and the history of popular music. It eliminated his most innovative peer. Would Elvis have been pushed to be more creative, more artistically ambitious if Buddy Holly had been there to challenge him throughout the 1960s? We will never know. Instead, Elvis had an open field. He was the undisputed king with no serious rivals. This lack of competition may have contributed to the creative stagnation of his movie years. There's a sadder, more personal connection too. Both Elvis and Buddy Holly were from the South. Both were deeply influenced by country and rhythm and blues. They came from the same musical soil. They both had young wives. Elvis met Priscilla in Germany. Buddy Holly had been married to Maria Elena Santiago for less than 6 months when he died. She was pregnant at the time and suffered a miscarriage shortly after his death, reportedly due to the psychological trauma. These were young men just starting their lives, caught in the whirlwind of a new kind of fame. The story of the crash is a story of chance. The tour bus they were traveling on had broken down. Holly chartered the plane so they could get to their next gig and have time to do their laundry. Valens won his seat on a coin toss. The Big Bopper, who had the flu, took Waylon Jennings' seat. Jennings, who was playing bass for Holly, would later be haunted by his last conversation with his friend. Holly had joked, "Well, I hope your old bus freezes up." Jennings replied, "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." The throwaway line that would become a lifelong burden. Did this tragedy, by removing his most significant musical rival, inadvertently pave the way for Elvis's safe, commercialized 1960s career? Was the death of rock's most promising innovator a necessary, albeit tragic, event for the king to maintain his undisputed crown? And what would the music of the 60s and 70s have sounded like if that small plane had landed safely in that Iowa field? Number 9. What secrets did his shadow, the Colonel, take to the grave? Colonel Tom Parker died on January 21st, 1997. He was 87. He died of a stroke, living out his final years in a Las Vegas hotel, still gambling, still scheming. He was Elvis Presley's manager, or, more accurately, he was Elvis Presley's creator, promoter, and controller. There would be no Elvis as we know him without the Colonel, and many argue that Elvis's tragic decline was also the Colonel's fault. His death wasn't mysterious, but the life he lived and the secrets he kept are central to understanding the mystery of Elvis. The first secret was his name. He wasn't Tom Parker, he was Andreas Cornelis van Queech, born in Breda, Netherlands. He entered the United States illegally in 1929, joining the army to get citizenship. He was never a real colonel, the title was an honorary one given to him by a Louisiana governor. He was, in essence, a man without a country and without an identity. This lack of a valid passport is the most cited reason for why Elvis, one of the biggest stars in the world, never toured internationally outside of a few shows in Canada in 1957. The Colonel couldn't leave the U.S. because he might not be allowed back in. He trapped the world's biggest star within the borders of a single country to protect his own secret. The second secret is darker. There is a persistent theory, explored in Alana Nash's biography, The Colonel, the extraordinary story of the frick and frack of Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis Presley, that Parker may have fled the Netherlands because he was a suspect in a murder. A young woman was bludgeoned to death in his hometown of Breda, and the case was never solved. The timing of his sudden illegal immigration is suspicious. We will likely never know the truth, but it paints a picture of a man with a dark past, a man capable of extreme measures to protect himself. His control over Elvis was absolute. He took an unprecedented 50% of Elvis's earnings, far above the industry standard. He controlled every aspect of his career, from the movie deals to the merchandise. After Elvis's '68 comeback, when he was creatively revitalized and wanted to tour the world and make serious films, it was the Colonel who pushed him into the lucrative but soul-crushing grind of Las Vegas residencies. It was easier to control, it was more profitable, it required no passports. He sold Elvis to the International Hotel for a steady stream of cash, much of which the Colonel himself lost at the casino's gambling tables. When Elvis died, the Colonel's behavior was bizarre. He showed up at Graceland wearing a Hawaiian shirt and a baseball cap, looking more like a tourist than a grieving manager. He seemed more concerned with securing the rights to Elvis's legacy than with the death of the man who had been his sole client for over 2 decades. He continued to manage the Elvis Presley estate, a clear conflict of interest, until a court-ordered investigation in 1981 found that his management had been unethical and that he had not acted in Elvis's best interests. The relationship between Elvis and the Colonel is one of the most fascinating and destructive in music history. It was a symbiotic partnership. Elvis, the shy, insecure boy, needed a father figure, a strong hand to guide him. The Colonel, the carnival huckster, needed a star attraction. They found each other, and together they conquered the world. But in the end, the relationship became toxic. Elvis was trapped. He talked about firing the Colonel, but he never could. The psychological hold was too strong. What other secrets did the Colonel have? Did he know more about Elvis's drug use than he let on, and did he enable it to keep his star compliant and working? This was control over Elvis, motivated by greed, by a genuine but twisted form of protection, or by a fear that Elvis might discover his secret past. And is it possible that the biggest unexplained connection to Elvis's death isn't a famous celebrity, but the shadowy, stateless carnival barker who pulled his strings until the very end? Number 8. Was the doctor who prescribed the pills a healer or a dealer? Dr. George Nicopolis, known to the world as Dr. Nick, died on February 24, 2016. He was 88 years old. For the last decade of Elvis Presley's life, Dr. Nick was more than just his physician. He was his confidant, his traveling companion, and the man who held the prescription pad. His death of natural causes came almost 40 years after his most famous patients. But his name will forever be linked to the controversy and tragedy of Elvis's final years. He is the man at the center of the storm. Dr. Nick first met Elvis in 1967, treating him for saddle sores from horseback riding. By the early 1970s, he had become Elvis's full-time personal physician. He traveled with Elvis on tour. He was a constant presence at Graceland. He was a part of the inner circle. His role was to keep the show on the road. Elvis had a grueling performance schedule, and he suffered from a host of medical issues, both real and psychosomatic. He had glaucoma, high blood pressure, and a colon condition. He also suffered from chronic insomnia. Dr. Nick's job was to manage these conditions and ensure Elvis could get on stage every night. The method he used was a dizzying array of prescription medications. In his 2010 book, The King and Dr. Nick: What Really Happened to Elvis and Me, Dr. Nick admitted to prescribing thousands of doses of drugs to Elvis. He rationalized his actions by saying he was trying to control Elvis's intake. He claimed that if he didn't prescribe the drugs, Elvis would get them from less scrupulous sources. He said he would sometimes substitute placebos in an attempt to wean Elvis off the more powerful narcotics. He portrayed himself as a man caught in an impossible situation, trying to help a friend who was also a global superstar with an insatiable appetite for pills. The state of Tennessee saw it differently. In 1980, Dr. Nick was indicted on 14 counts of overprescribing drugs to Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, and others. The prosecution painted him as a celebrity-struck doctor who enabled the addictions of his famous patients. They presented evidence that in the last 20 months of Elvis's life, Dr. Nick had prescribed over 19,000 doses of drugs. The jury, however, acquitted him. They seemed to believe his defense that he was acting in what he thought were his patient's best interests. But the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners was not convinced. After years of legal battles, they permanently revoked his medical license in 1995, stating that he had been guilty of grossly unethical and unprofessional conduct. The connection to Elvis's death is direct and undeniable. The official cause was cardiac arrhythmia, but the contributing factor was polypharmacy, the use of multiple drugs. The toxicology report found high levels of codeine and evidence of 10 other prescription medications. The debate has raged for decades. Was Elvis a willful addict who manipulated his doctor, or was Dr. Nick a negligent enabler who failed in his duty of care? The truth, as is often the case, is likely somewhere in the murky middle. This story echoes through celebrity history. We saw it with Dr. Conrad Murray and Michael Jackson. We see it in countless stories of stars surrounded by people who can't or won't say no. The power dynamic between a superstar and their employee, even a professional like a doctor, becomes warped. The patient is the one signing the checks. The desire to help becomes entangled with the desire to maintain access in a lucrative position. What was Dr. Nick's true motivation? Was he a well-meaning but weak man who got in over his head? Was he a calculated opportunist who saw a chance to live a life of luxury and excitement? Or was he, in his own mind, a genuine friend trying to save a man who was already determined to destroy himself? And if he had refused to prescribe the pills, would Elvis have lived longer, or would he have simply found another doctor to write the prescriptions that led him to his grave. Number 7. Did a shared love for martial arts connect the king of rock with the king of kung fu? And Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. He was 32. He died in Hong Kong at the apartment of a Taiwanese actress named Betty Ting Pei. He had complained of a headache. She gave him a prescription painkiller called Equigesic, and he went to lie down. He never woke up. The official cause of death was cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain, attributed to an allergic reaction to an ingredient in the painkiller. Like Elvis, he was a king in his domain, the king of kung fu. And like Elvis, his sudden death at the peak of his powers was a massive shock that spawned decades of conspiracy theories. The connection between Elvis Presley and Bruce Lee is not one of direct friendship, but of shared passion and parallel paths. Elvis was a legitimate and dedicated martial artist. He discovered it in Germany during his army service and practiced it for the rest of his life. He earned a black belt in karate. It wasn't just a hobby for him, it was a discipline. It was a spiritual practice. In the chaotic world of his fame, the rigid structure and focus of martial arts provided him with a sense of control and peace. He incorporated karate moves into his live performances in the 1970s, the famous chops and stances becoming part of his stage persona. Elvis was a huge admirer of Bruce Lee. He saw the raw power, the charisma, and the revolutionary approach Lee brought to martial arts. Lee was doing for Kung Fu what Elvis had done for music, taking an established form, injecting it with his own unique energy, and presenting it to the world in a way they had never seen before. Lee founded his own martial art philosophy, Jeet Kune Do, which emphasized practicality and adaptability. He was an innovator. Elvis respected that. According to members of the Memphis Mafia, like his bodyguard Red West, Elvis was devastated by Lee's death. He saw him as a true master. Their careers were parallel explosions. Elvis exploded onto the American scene in 1956. Bruce Lee, after a career as a child actor in Hong Kong and a stint in Hollywood as Kato in The Green Hornet, exploded onto the global scene with The Big Boss in 1971 and Fist of Fury in 1972. Both men were physical performers whose charisma was magnetic. They possessed a combination of grace and danger that was captivating on screen. They both broke cultural barriers. Elvis brought black rhythm and blues to white audiences, and Bruce Lee brought Chinese martial arts cinema to the West, shattering stereotypes of Asian men in Hollywood. The mysteries surrounding their deaths also run parallel. Bruce Lee's official cause of death has always been questioned. Their theories range from a reaction to cannabis found in his system, to murder by Chinese triads or rival martial arts masters, to a family curse. The 2017 book Bruce Lee: A Life by Matthew Pauly presents a compelling theory that Lee died of heat stroke. He had his underarm sweat glands removed to prevent perspiration on camera, which would have impaired his body's ability to cool itself in the hot Hong Kong summer. This mundane medical explanation is, for many, less satisfying than the more conspiratorial theories. Both men's bodies were their instruments, and both pushed them to the absolute limit. Lee's physical training was legendary for its intensity. Elvis's performance schedule, especially in Las Vegas, was punishing. And both men used substances to manage their bodies. Lee used cannabis, and Elvis used a pharmacy of prescription drugs. Their deaths, 4 years apart, marked the loss of two of the 20th century's most electrifying physical performers. Did Elvis see in Bruce Lee a fellow traveler, another man who had to create a fortress of discipline to survive the chaos of his own fame? Was Lee's shocking death a foreshadowing for Elvis of his own mortality, a warning that even the most disciplined body can suddenly fail? And is there a deeper connection between the physical energy they both projected, a kind of life force that burned so intensely that it simply had to burn out far too soon? Number 6 was the 27 Club, a ghostly prelude to the King's own tragic end. The 27 Club is a grim footnote in music history. It's the colloquial name for a group of influential musicians who all died at the age of 27. The most famous members are Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison, who all died within a 10-month period between 1970 and 1971. The list also includes Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, and later Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse. Elvis Presley was not 27 when he died, he was 42. But the phenomenon of the 27 Club, which unfolded during the last decade of his life, is a powerful and dark connection to his own story. It was a harbinger of the rock and roll death mythos that Elvis himself would ultimately personify. Jimi Hendrix died on September 18, 1970. He asphyxiated on his own vomit after taking sleeping pills. Janis Joplin died less than a month later. on October 4th, 1970, from a heroin overdose. Jim Morrison died on July 3rd, 1971, in a bathtub in Paris, officially of heart failure, though no autopsy was ever performed. These three deaths, in rapid succession, defined an era. They were the casualties of the excess and disillusionment that followed the peace and love dream of the 1960s. They were artists who, pushed the boundaries of their music and their lives and paid the ultimate price. And Elvis watched this happen from his perch in Las Vegas. By 1970, he was a different kind of rock star. He was the establishment. He was the man who met with President Nixon to decry the very drug culture that was consuming Hendrix and Joplin. In his mind, there was a clear distinction between the illegal street drugs of the counterculture and the prescription medications provided to him by a doctor. But was there really a difference? A drug is a drug, an addiction is an addiction. He saw their self-destruction as a moral failing, perhaps never recognizing the same pattern in his own life. The 27 Club represents a specific kind of rock and roll tragedy, the flame out. The artist who burns too bright too fast. Its story of youthful rebellion reaching its logical fatal conclusion. Elvis's tragedy was different. It was a slow corrosion. He didn't flame out, he rusted. He got old, he got overweight, he became a parody of his former self, but the root cause was the same: the unbearable pressure of fame, the isolation, the search for escape through chemical means. He was living a slow-motion version of the same story that killed Jim Morrison. There's a strange irony in the numbers. Elvis died at 42, which is the reverse of 24. James Dean died at 24. These numerological games are a staple of conspiracy theories, but they speak to a human need to find patterns in chaos. The number 27 became a cursed number in rock music. Was Elvis's 42 a different kind of cursed number, representing a longer, more drawn-out path to the same destination? In the book Heavier Than Heaven, Charles Arcross's biography of Kurt Cobain delves into Cobain's fascination with the 27 Club. He seemed to be almost predicting his own inclusion. It was a legacy he was aware of. Did Elvis see the deaths of Morrison, Hendrix, and Joplin as a warning? Or did he see them as something completely separate from his own reality, a problem for other, lesser stars? His own death, 6 years after Morrison's, would prove that the temptations and dangers of fame were universal, regardless of the type of drug or the age of the star. Is the 27 Club a statistical anomaly, or does it point to a specific period of psychological vulnerability for artists struggling with the transition from youthful fame to mature artistry? Did the deaths of these younger, more rebellious stars create a blind spot for Elvis, allowing him to believe his own form of dependency was somehow safer or more legitimate? And in the grand narrative of rock and roll tragedy, are they all just chapters in the same book, a book whose final, bloated chapter would be written by the king himself? Number 5. Did a co-star's mysterious drowning hint at the darkness of Elvis's Hollywood? Natalie Wood drowned on November 29th, 1981. She was 43. She disappeared from the yacht she was on with her husband, Robert Wagner, and their guest actor, Christopher Walken, off the coast of Catalina Island. Her body was found the next morning, floating in the water, wearing a flannel nightgown and socks. Her death was initially ruled an accidental drowning, but the story never sat right. There were bruises on her body. The timeline of events was confusing and contradictory. In 2012, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the case, changing the cause of death to drowning and other undetermined factors. It remains one of Hollywood's most endearing and chilling mysteries. The direct connection to Elvis is from an earlier, more innocent time. Elvis and Natalie Wood dated briefly in 1956. He was 21, the new sensation. She was 18, already a seasoned actress, who had been in movies since she was a child. She flew to Memphis to meet his family. There are famous photos of them together, riding a motorcycle, looking like the perfect young Hollywood couple. According to reports, the relationship was short-lived. Natalie was reportedly put off by Elvis's growing entourage, the Memphis Mafia, and his close relationship with his mother. But they remained friends. Their lives were both defined by the Hollywood system. Natalie Wood was a product of the studio system from childhood. She never had a normal life. She was a star before she was a teenager. She knew the pressures, the politics, and the dangers of that world. Well, Elvis entered that world as an adult, but he, too, became a product packaged and sold in a series of films that rarely challenged him. They both knew what it was like to be a commodity. Natalie's death pulls back the curtain on the dark side of Hollywood glamour, a world of secrets, power, and potential violence. The story, as pieced together by investigators and detailed in Suzanne Finstad's book Natasha, the Biography of Natalie Wood, involves a night of heavy drinking and a heated argument between Wood and Wagner. The yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, has changed his story over the years, eventually claiming that he believes Wagner was responsible for her death. No charges have ever been filed. The mystery endures. This darkness was not foreign to Elvis's world. While his own death was not a mystery in the same way, his life was filled with the pressures and paranoia that come with that level of fame. He received death threats, he was surrounded by bodyguards, he lived in a self-imposed prison at Graceland. The Hollywood he and Natalie inhabited was a place of immense wealth and opportunity, but it was also a place where people could get hurt, where secrets were kept, and where the official story was not always the true story. Her death, 4 years after his, felt like an aftershock of the same earthquake that had toppled the king. It was another reminder that the fairy tale lives of movie stars often had grim endings. Both Elvis and Natalie were icons of a certain kind of American dream, the dream of fame and fortune. And both of their deaths revealed the nightmare that often lies beneath that dream. He died from the internal pressures of that life. She died under circumstances that suggest a violent external force. Both were victims of the world. They helped create what really happened on that yacht in 1981. Was Natalie Wood's death a tragic accident, or was it the result of a violent confrontation? Does her story reveal a truth about the world of celebrity that Elvis also knew, that the glamour is a thin veneer over a much darker reality? And is it just a coincidence that two people who briefly shared the spotlight at the dawn of their fame would both meet such tragic, premature, and endlessly debated ends? Number 4. Did a Queen of the Blues predict the King's own lonely end? Judy Garland died on June 22, 1969. She was 47. She was found in the bathroom of her rented London home by her fifth husband, Mickey Deans. The cause of death was an incautious self-overdosage of barbiturates. It was ruled an accident. There was no suicide note. Her body had simply given out after a lifetime of addiction to the pills that both allowed her to perform and ultimately killed her. She was a legend, a star since she was a teenager in The Wizard of Oz, a Queen of Entertainment. Her story is a tragic blueprint, a cautionary tale that seems to be written specifically for Elvis Presley. The parallels are almost too perfect. Both were discovered young. Both had immense, once-in-a-generation talents. Both were controlled and manipulated by the systems that made them famous. For Garland, it was the iron fist of MGM studio head Louis B. Mayer. For Elvis, it was Colonel Tom Parker. And both were introduced to prescription drugs not as a recreational choice, but as a tool of the trade. The stories from the set of The Wizard of Oz are infamous. Garland, a teenager, was given amphetamines, pet pills, to keep her energy up during long shooting days and to suppress her appetite. Then, at night, she was given barbiturates to sleep. The studio got her hooked. It was a way to control their asset to ensure she could meet the grueling demands of production. This pattern continued for the rest of her life. The pills were her solution for everything, for stage fright, for insomnia, for depression. Elvis's introduction to prescription drugs followed a similar path. It reportedly began in the army, as a way to stay awake on duty. Later, back in civilian life, the pressures of touring and performing led him to the same cycle of uppers and downers. It wasn't about getting high. It was about functioning. It was about being able to sleep after the adrenaline of a show and being able to wake up and do it all again. For both Garland and Elvis, the addiction was born out of the logistics of being a superstar. Both also suffered from profound insecurity and a desperate need for the love of their audience. Garland's live performances were legendary for their emotional intensity. She would pour her heart out on stage, and the audience would roar its approval. But the moment she walked off stage, the loneliness and self-doubt would return. Elvis was the same. He came alive in front of a crowd. It was the only place he felt truly loved and accepted. The silence of a hotel room or the halls of Graceland after a show was deafening. This emotional void was what the pills were meant to fill. Garland's death in 1969 came at a pivotal moment for Elvis. He had just completed his 68 comeback special and was preparing for his triumphant return to live performing in Las Vegas. He was at the peak of his mature powers. Did he see Garland's death as a news story about a faded star from a bygone era? Or did he feel a flicker of recognition? Did he see her story and think, That could never be me. Or 8 years later, he would be found dead in his bathroom just like her, the victim of the same class of drugs. Her funeral in New York City was a massive public event, with over 20,000 people lining the streets. It was a precursor to the scenes that would unfold at Graceland. In 1977, she was one of the first modern celebrities whose personal struggles were as famous as her talent, and whose death was seen as the inevitable, tragic final act of a public drama. Was Judy Garland's life and death a script that Elvis Presley unknowingly followed? Did the same industry that created these two monumental talents have a built-in mechanism for their destruction? And is it possible that for some stars, the applause they so desperately crave is not a sound of love, but the ticking of a clock counting down to their own inevitable end? Number 3, did his mother's death create a wound that never healed? Gladys Love Presley died on August 14, 1958. She was 46. The cause was a heart attack following a sudden and severe bout of hepatitis. At the time of her death, her son Elvis was 23 years old and a private in the United States Army stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. He was granted emergency leave to fly to Memphis to be with her, but he arrived just hours before she passed away. He was inconsolable. He sobbed uncontrollably at her funeral, throwing himself over her casket. He told his friends, "Everything I have is gone." Her death was the great trauma of his life, a wound from which he never fully recovered. The connection between Gladys's death and Elvis's own, 19 years later, is not a mystery of conspiracy, but of psychology. To understand Elvis Presley, you have to understand his relationship with his mother. He was her only surviving child. His identical twin brother, Jesse Garon, was stillborn. This fact created an incredibly intense bond between mother and son. They were everything to each other. They even had their own baby talk. He was her little boy, even after he became the most famous man in the world. Gladys was a simple woman from rural Mississippi. She was unprepared for the whirlwind of her son's fame. She never trusted the people around him. She worried constantly. As Elvis's fame grew, her health declined. She gained weight, she began to drink heavily. She was by all accounts deeply unhappy. The mansion at Graceland, the Cadillacs, the wealth none of it brought her peace. She was a country woman lost in a bewildering new world. She was lonely. In a tragic irony, the success Elvis worked so hard to give her may have been what killed her. Her death left a void in Elvis's life that nothing could fill. He had lost his anchor, because his father, Vernon, would remarry. His friends in the Memphis Mafia were loyal, but they were employees. He married Priscilla, but their relationship was complicated and ultimately failed. No one could replace Gladys. She was the one person whose love was unconditional, who had no agenda other than his well-being. Many biographers, including Peter Guralnick, point to Gladys's death as the key turning point in Elvis's life. It was after her death, while in the army in Germany, that his use of prescription pills began in earnest. Was this a way to cope with the grief? A way to numb the pain that was too great to bear? It seems almost certain. The root of his addiction, the addiction that would eventually kill him, can be traced back to the overwhelming loss of his mother. There is a strange, sad symmetry in the dates. Gladys died on August 14th, Elvis died on August 16th. Just 2 days apart on the calendar. Graceland, the home he bought for her, became his tomb. He is buried next to her in the meditation garden. In death, they are reunited. He spent the 19 years after her death searching for the comfort and security she had provided, and he never found it. Not in fame, not in marriage, not in religion, and not in drugs. Was Elvis Presley's entire adult life an attempt to fill the hole left by his mother's death? Did his self-destructive behavior stem from a deep unresolved grief that he could never escape? And is it possible that his own death, at the age of 42, just 4 years younger than his mother was when she died, was a subconscious attempt to finally rejoin the only person he ever truly trusted? Number 2, did the ghost of Hank Williams ride in the back seat of the King's Cadillac? Hank Williams died on January 1st, 1953. He was 29. He was found dead in the backseat of his powder blue Cadillac by his driver. They were on their way to a gig in Canton, Ohio. He was a ghost before he even died, a rail-thin, alcoholic, drug-addicted genius who was writing and singing some of the most profound and painful songs in American history. The official cause of death was heart failure. He was the hillbilly Shakespeare, and his death created the archetype of the doomed country music star. For a young Elvis Presley who was just starting to find his own voice, the ghost of Hank Williams loomed large. The musical connection is direct and profound. Elvis grew up listening to the Grand Ole Opry on the radio. Hank Williams was one of its biggest stars. In 1954, during his legendary Sun Sessions, Elvis recorded a cover of Williams's "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry." His early style was a fusion of the black rhythm and blues he heard on Beale Street and the white country and gospel music he heard on the radio. Hank Williams was a key ingredient in that mix. He was the voice of white, rural, southern heartbreak. But the connection is deeper than just musical influence. It's a connection of persona and tragedy. Hank Williams was a superstar who couldn't handle the pressure. He was unreliable, often showing up to shows drunk, if he showed up at all. He was in constant physical pain from a back condition, which led to a dependence on morphine and other painkillers mixed with alcohol. He wrote songs of incredible sadness like "Your Cheatin' Heart" and Cold Heart, because he was living them. His life was a mess, and he turned that mess into art. Does that sound familiar? A southern boy with a monumental talent thrust into the spotlight, who struggles with the pressures of fame, suffers from chronic health issues, and turns to a cocktail of drugs and alcohol to manage the pain, both physical and emotional. The story of Hank Williams is a prequel to the story of Elvis Presley. Williams' story unfolded on the smaller stage of the country music world in the early 1950s. Elvis's would play out on a global stage 2 decades later, but the plot was eerily the same. The image of Hank Williams dying in the backseat of his Cadillac is one of the most powerful in music folklore. It's an image of loneliness and transience. He was a star, but he died like a vagrant on the road between one town and the next. Elvis died in a mansion, a king in his castle. But was he any less lonely? Graceland, in his final years, was its own kind of backseat, a place of isolation where he was being driven toward his own final destination. Colin Escott's biography, Hank Williams, the biography, details a man at war with himself, a man whose genius was inseparable from his demons. It's a template for the tortured artist. Elvis's demons were different, perhaps, but they were just as powerful. He didn't have the raw poetic despair of Williams, but he had his own profound sadness, a loneliness that all the adoration in the world couldn't touch. Was Hank Williams' life and death a prophecy, a warning of the dangers that lay ahead for any Southern boy who dared to sing his heart out to the world? Did Elvis, in covering Hank's songs, also subconsciously absorb his tragic trajectory? And is it possible that the spirit of American music, the one that animated both of these men, demands a sacrifice from its greatest kings? Number 1, did Elvis really die at all? This is the final and most persistent unexplained connection. It connects Elvis's death not to another person's, but to his own life. The theory is simple. Elvis Presley did not die on August 16, 1977. He faked his death. He was tired of the fame, tired of the pressure, and he simply walked away. He is still out there, somewhere, living a quiet, normal life. It is the ultimate conspiracy theory, a story so powerful that for millions of people it has become a kind of faith. The evidence is a collection of anomalies, coincidences, and wishful thinking. The name on his gravestone is Elvis Aaron Presley, but his middle name was officially spelled with one law Aaron. Was this a deliberate mistake, a secret signal that the man buried there is not the real Elvis? The official cause of death was changed several times. The photo of him in his coffin, published by the National Enquirer, looked waxy and unreal to some, like a dummy. A life insurance policy was never cashed. There have been thousands of sightings of Elvis over the years, from a gas station in Kalamazoo, Michigan, to a Burger King somewhere in England. The theory is compelling because it provides a better ending to the story. The official story is just too sad. The king of rock and roll, dying bloated and drugged out on his bathroom floor, is a pathetic, undignified end for a cultural hero. The idea that he was clever enough to escape it all, to pull off the greatest vanishing act in history, is a much more satisfying narrative. It restores his power. It keeps the magic alive. This theory connects to a deeper human need, the refusal to let our heroes die. We see it with other figures. There were theories that James Dean survived his car crash. There are people who believe Princess Diana faked her death to escape the media. It's a modern form of myth-making. In ancient times, heroes were said to ascend to the heavens to become gods. In modern times, they go into hiding in the Midwest. The 1981 book Elvis, Where Are You? By Gail Brewer Giorgio was one of the first to seriously lay out the Elvis is alive theory. It pointed to supposed clues in his recordings and behavior. The theory has been a staple of tabloid culture ever since. It's a story that refuses to die, because the alternative, the truth is, too painful to accept. Elvis represented youth, vitality, and rebellion. To accept his decline and death is to accept our own mortality. What if the theory is not about whether he is literally alive, but about the survival of his spirit? Elvis Presley, the man may be gone, but Elvis, the idea, the icon, the cultural force, is immortal. The Elvis is alive theory is just a literal interpretation of that figurative truth. His music is still played. His image is still everywhere. Graceland is the second most visited home in America after the White House. In a very real sense, he never left. So the final connection is a question mark. It connects his death to an alternate reality, a parallel universe where the story has a happier ending. It is a mystery that can never be solved because it exists in the space between fact and belief. Was the misspelling on the gravestone a simple error, or a secret message to his true fans? Are the thousands of sightings cases of mistaken identity, or are they fleeting glimpses of a man who successfully escaped his own legend? And in the end, does it matter more what the death certificate says, or what millions of people choose to believe in their hearts? The final unexplained connection is the one between the man who died and the myth that will live forever.